Often strong people are naturally calm and don't seek conflict, but this isn't always the case. Today's story is about a person who combined cruelty and fear and the horrifying aftermath of this dangerous union. In Michigan, there's a place called Traverse City, but before I dive into the gruesome events that happened there, I should warn you, your hometown might be hiding dark secrets too. Please drop your location in the comments. Who knows, maybe the next video will uncover the truth nobody's talking about. I'm collecting stories from all over the country, and your area could be featured next on my channel. In this small town where life flowed steadily, there was the picturesque Lake Michigan. During summer, the place filled with tourists who came to enjoy festivals and water sports events. They swam, boated, and enjoyed delicious local cuisine surrounded by unique landscapes. But when winter arrived, everything changed. Snow covered the ground, and tourists became significantly fewer. In this quiet corner, where time seemed to slow down, lived and worked 18-year-old Kaylee Bruce, a young woman whose fate was inextricably linked to this place. She had always been a cheerful and bright person. Smart, attractive, and determined. By the late 90s, she was thinking about pursuing higher education. Thanks to her academic achievements in school, she managed to enroll without much difficulty at Northwestern Michigan College, located in Traverse City. To support herself away from her parents, the student worked evenings as an administrator at the registration desk of a local beach condominium that rented apartments, rooms, and houses, including to visitors. The condominium, located right on the lakeshore, was very popular, especially during the season. On Monday evening, February 16th, 1998, Kaylee was working at the resort's registration desk from 5 to 8 o'clock. In February, there were almost no tourists, just a few local residents, and she felt almost alone in the building. The previous evening, while talking with a friend, she shared her impatience for the season to begin when there would be more guests and, with them, better pay. That day, there was just over an hour left until the end of her shift, and the young woman had to do some light. The cleaning was finishing, and all items were neatly stored in the utility closet. Then, as if waiting for something, she headed home. During this period, her life was connected with her friend Kim, who also worked at this condominium. That evening, Kim wasn't on shift, but fate brought her past the resort around 7:30 when she was dropping off her friends after dinner at a restaurant. Driving by, Kim glanced toward the hotel and noticed light coming from behind the administration desk. There was Kaylee, who had started to gather her things. Kim, wanting to drop off her friends as quickly as possible, planned to come back for Kaylee, but something in the air foreshadowed changes. She was coming back, and time dragged on like eternity. More than 40 minutes had passed when, driving past the resort, Kim noticed that the light inside was turned off and Kaylee was nowhere to be seen. Anxiety crept into the young woman's heart. She decided she was late and her friend had already left. But, driven by instinct, she approached the door to look through the glass. The emptiness inside only strengthened her belief that Kaylee had left the place. Turning around, Kim headed home, not suspecting that her world would soon be turned upside down. The next morning, February 17th, 1998, around 7 o'clock, the first person to arrive at work in the hotel office was a climate equipment maintenance technician. His name was Zachary Medin, a young man who had no idea that his day would become the beginning of something terrible. He immediately noticed that the door was unlocked. This didn't alarm him. The young man calmly entered. Calling out her name, he received no answer. No one was visible. Kaylee should have already been starting to prepare for the workday at the administration desk. The young woman was never late and always arrived early, but not today. All the lights remained off. The technician walked around the floor and noticed a glimmer through a crack in the utility closet door. Zachary decided to go down and check if the administrator was there. When the young man got closer, he noticed suspicious red spots near the threshold. In the darkness, shrouded in ominous silence, the young man opened the door and encountered a horror that would forever change his life. Zachary, overcome with panic, rushed out of the utility room and, without thinking, dialed 911. When police arrived at the scene, they saw him, a young man who could barely speak, his face distorted with fear and his eyes full of tears. He described what he had seen, and every sound he made reflected deep emotional trauma. The utility closet, which stored household appliances and cleaning equipment, became the most frightening crime scene in the history of local law enforcement. This place will forever remain in their memory as a symbol of horror and the unpredictability of human nature. In the small room where silence reigned, blood was splattered on the walls and ceiling, as if an artist in a fit of madness had left his mark. In the center of this chaos lay the body of a young woman, so mutilated that the only way to identify her was by the badge on her chest. This was 18-year-old Kaylee Bruce, a young employee whose life was cut short in the blink of an eye. Next to her, like sinister witnesses, lay 3 smashed irons, fragments of plastic and metal covered with dried blood, and among them, particles of scalp and hair could be distinguished. The deceased was without clothes, and one of the power cord from an iron was wrapped around her neck so tightly that, in the dark shadow of night, something horrifying happened. The victim, defenseless and silent, faced unimaginable cruelty. The medical examiner, examining the body, discovered 19 torn wounds, so deep that the flesh was cut to the bone. The skull, as if smashed with a hammer, bore signs of numerous blows, and fractures of the cranial vault and facial bones spoke of furious violence. Severe injuries to the neck and throat indicated that the victim had been strangled, and the body was mutilated by blows from a blunt object, leaving marks on the abdomen, chest, and pelvis. But the most horrifying fact remained a metal rod inserted into the groin, adding even more dark details to this story. With a force that could break a person, he damaged the tissues, reaching the pelvic bone, penetrating it several centimeters. The medical examiner, studying this terrible injury, concluded that the young woman remained conscious for some time until she bled to death. Her death was excruciating, and the small utility closet where all this happened was drenched in blood. Blood was smeared on the body as if someone had tried to wipe away traces. Despite the tiny size of the room, forensic experts spent 6.5 hours collecting dozens of small pieces of evidence, and it was obvious that she had desperately resisted her tormentor. That night, when darkness enveloped the city, something terrible happened. At the scene of the violent fight, numerous defensive injuries were discovered, indicating that the victim had desperately fought for her life. Disorder reigned around, and signs of struggle left footprints on the floor, as if the attacker had left no chance. His rage only angered the victim, and on her body, especially on the head, traces of this sinister encounter remained. When a local reporter, drawn to this eerie case, arrived at the scene, he was struck by the amount of blood. He immediately understood that he had witnessed the most terrible crime in the town's history. The experienced journalist knew that this case would become the headline of all newspapers. The journalist, having visited dozens of bloody scenes over the years of his work, had never encountered such cruelty. The man called the perpetrator a real monster, unable to understand how someone could so cruelly deal with innocent 18-year-old Kaylee. Bruce had left this life around 8 o'clock the previous day. Probably, when Kim approached the office, her friend was already beyond help. She herself miraculously avoided an encounter with the killer. The young woman's family was shocked by such a violent crime and couldn't understand who could wish harm to this sweet girl. Relatives, friends, and acquaintances were in complete shock. Detectives, immersed in the grim details of this case, heard that Kaylee was a person who radiated kindness and warmth. No one could recall a single bad word about her, and this created an atmosphere of shocking mystery. How could it happen that someone decided to attack? Only insignificant items disappeared from the crime scene, casting doubt on the version of robberies gone wrong. The detectives were drawn to the fact that the criminal probably knew Kaylee personally. The cruelty of the attack spoke of something more. Revenge, hatred, jealousy. These motives became increasingly likely, and there was a threat in the air coming from the attacker. He had been watching her, knowing her daily routine. This allowed him to choose a moment when Kaylee would be most vulnerable. The killer probably knew when to strike so that no one would be around. She might have trusted this person. The search for the criminal began in the immediate surroundings, among local residents who regularly had contact with the deceased, possibly living nearby. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras on the resort territory or even inside the office, depriving the investigation of important clues. All blood at the crime scene was analyzed. The victim, as if left to the mercy of fate, did not leave a single fingerprint behind. This was clearly the work of someone familiar with the criminal world. The criminal had possibly acted in gloves or had carefully destroyed all his traces. In the small utility closet where the drama unfolded, more than 100 pieces of evidence were collected, but the only trace left by the aggressor was shoe prints on the body and the bloody floor. Forensic experts, using a special substance, were able to get a clearer pattern of the sole, capturing all the minutest details. When the police finally got a complete footprint, they assessed its importance for the investigation. The killer's size was impressive. He was a strong guy whose shoes left traces full of aggression. The tread was clear, resembling work boots, which could not but alert the detectives. They went to local stores in search of a similar pair. As it turned out, the imprint belonged to shoes of the pair brand, and the impression was made using special paper. When detectives matched it with traces found on Kaylee's body, they discovered a complete match. The only lead led to a person who probably used special clothing. Soon, detectives decided to talk to the worker who serviced this place. In the condominium, where elevators carried residents up and down, lived a man named Sid. Local women whispered about his strange behavior, about how he allowed himself unflattering comments towards them. But what was really strange, a worker who knew Sid provided an alibi. A few days before Kaylee's murder, he had left town with his family, and his wife confirmed this. The family returned only in the late hours after the tragedy. However, when investigators began looking for evidence, Sid's shoes did not match the description. He wore work boots, but with a completely different tread. The puzzle was becoming more and more confusing. In the grim light of the tragedy, a young man named Zachary Medin, who worked at the condominium, became the center of authorities' attention. He was the first to discover the body and, without hesitation, reported it to the police. This maintenance technician, dressed in special work clothes and footwear, instilled fear among the young women who worked nearby. Their concerns intensified after the terrible incident. Detectives, alerted by his actions, noticed that he himself contacted the police, reporting the find. This behavior is sometimes observed in killers who seek to divert suspicion from themselves and find out at what stage the investigation is. Before learning all the details, what do you think? Was this crime solved or not? Write your bet in the comments. The investigation revolved around a mysterious figure named Zach, who was brought to the station for official questioning. His goal was to check and exclude from the list of suspects. The technician conducting the interrogation was still shocked by what she had seen. Zach, barely containing his emotions, seemed sincere. He voluntarily allowed his car to be searched, and during this, traces resembling blood were found. These clues were collected and sent for examination. The young man himself claimed that such traces could have been left by his wife, who worked in the emergency department. The medical center employee confirmed his words. She returned home after work, and at that moment, when the crime had already been committed, found Zachary in bed. He was peacefully sleeping, preparing for the morning shift, but tension hung in the air. The investigation hit a dead end, and no valuable information was coming in. All suspects had been crossed off the list, and the anxiety of the local community reached its limit. Acquiring an ordinary pepper spray for self-defense became almost impossible. Batches flew off the shelves like hotcakes, and stores could barely keep up with supplies. The main buyers were schoolgirls, consumed by fear and uncertainty. Students, overwhelmed by fear, avoided solitary walks, especially in the dark. During this gloomy time, one of the detectives arrived at the college dormitory where Kaylee had studied. Witnesses began to talk about several suspicious young men who had already managed to attract attention. They needed to be checked. However, as it turned out, they had nothing to do with the case. Detectives also spoke with Kaylee's friend, Kate, who knew the deceased better than anyone else in town. She revealed that shortly before the tragedy, the heroine of the story had broken up with her boyfriend named Dylan, and their relationship had been complicated. In this confusing and disturbing case, the relationship between the couple was like a roller coaster. They would break up, then get back together. Kim knew they had broken up, but Dylan, as if obsessed, tried to restore the connection with Kaylee. His behavior was becoming more intrusive, even manipulative. Just 2 days after the murder, he found himself at the center of attention. Working with heating and climate equipment, he serviced the technology, but soon all eyes turned to his shoes. The Yite Pilar brand boots he wore turned out to be similar to the traces found at the crime scene. Dylan had several pairs of the same brand, and they were immediately confiscated for further investigation. The laboratory conducted an examination, but not a single trace of blood was found on the shoes. Of course, he could have had other boots, which he disposed of after the attack. But despite all the efforts of the police, no evidence against the young man was found. He had a reliable alibi, which excluded him from the list of suspects. In parallel, an investigation was conducted into the case of a young woman who did not live in the city and became a random victim. The killer could now be tens or even hundreds of kilometers away from the crime scene. A real drama erupted in the condominium, and the degree of cruelty of the crime spoke of deep hatred or even sadistic tendencies. Investigators searched for all possible criminals inclined to attack women, especially those who had recently been released from prison and lived in the area. But all efforts were in vain. During the inspection of the utility room, a small metal rod was found, apart from a car tire valve. Blood was found on it, as well as several hairs that did not belong to the victim. One of them had a whole follicle, which gave hope for creating a DNA profile of the probable criminal. Hopes for this were the last spark in the darkness of the investigation. There was still too little evidence, as the technologies of that time were far from perfect. In any case, this version needed to be verified, and that required time. They decided to use all the scarce materials they had at the moment. They organized a press conference and appealed to the public. The key point they focused on was the numerous false statements. People contacted the police station and all leads were checked. One of those who came forward was a local resident who worked as a host on a radio station. The man's name was John Chandler. He immediately understood that his information could be the key to solving the crime. On February 26, 1998, just 10 days after the brutal murder of the student, John, after the press conference, headed to a tire repair shop located near the resort area. While the host remained in the waiting room, John accidentally overheard a conversation between the manager and other employees. They were discussing the absence of one of the technicians who had not come to work for several days. All these people had also seen him last. At the press conference, people started talking about oddities, and rumors began to spread like wildfire. The missing person, it was claimed, had a very nasty character. One of the colleagues recalled that just a day after Kaylee Bruce's murder, he noticed a suspicious guy. On his boots were dark spots that clearly couldn't have been accidental. Another day later, this person bought new shoes and never wore the old ones again. When John heard all this, he didn't betray his excitement, only pretending that he had unintentionally overheard the conversation. The man bought tires and then, without wasting time, called the police station asking them to check this lead. The host, not suspecting what was happening, continued his work. It was felt that this information had enormous significance. The detectives, imbued with this confidence, headed to the tire factory. The manager, as if knowing that his time was running out, immediately confessed. John's words were true. Colleagues were discussing one of the employees, 25-year-old Halser, the son of the company's director. Several employees confirmed that he always wore Keter Pilar brand boots of a large size. But a few days after the murder, he had a new pair. Examining the place where Quinn usually worked, detectives noticed that all over the floor lay metal rods from tire valves, like forgotten evidence from the crime scene. Local workers confirmed that when replacing tires, they often fly off, and they constantly accidentally brought them home in their pockets. Now the police were sure that the host's statement was leading them in the right direction. Suspicions only strengthened when it turned out that Kevin had been renting a room on the resort property where the victim worked for 6 months. He had the opportunity to observe the young woman, calculate her daily routine, and choose a suitable time for action. The time when she found herself alone became the beginning of a dark story. Kevin, a young man with a mysterious past, was already communicating with investigators at 8 o'clock in the morning on February 17th. That day, the girl's body was discovered, and he was the only one who didn't ask a question about what happened, which raised suspicions. His words about being in a hurry to get to work sounded unconvincing. He quickly evaded contact with the authorities while evidence was still being collected at the crime scene. The process dragged on, and at the time of their meeting, detectives did not have the necessary clues. Tension hung in the air, and it became obvious that something was wrong with this story. The criminal could have been in the hands of law enforcement from the very first minutes of the investigation, but he managed to slip away. The new prime suspect wore boots of the same size. The decision to reanalyze the collected data became inevitable. Everything that local residents had told was carefully recorded. Detectives spoke with one resident of the condominium where the deceased had worked. She recalled how she returned home from work in the evening, when Kaylee was killed around 10 o'clock. The door was open, although she was sure she had locked it. Naturally, the witness. She never left her apartment open. But once, when everything changed, it became clear that the master key had disappeared from the administration desk. Suspicions at this moment began to fall on Kevin. His girlfriend, Kaylee's friend Kim, said that he often came to the office and lingered at the desk when the victim was working there. Kim thought that Kaylee liked him, and he used every free minute to talk with her. Even for made-up reasons, he constantly asked to open his apartment with spare keys, which only the condominium administrator had access to. He claimed that he either forgot or lost something important. It seemed he was just looking for an excuse to communicate more closely with Kaylee. Kevin never showed aggression or suspicion. He was polite and calm. Tall, athletic, practicing martial arts. He looked like the perfect athlete, but in his appearance lurked a shadow, reminiscent of a probable killer. However, when he disappeared, new suspicions could not be found. In search of answers, we headed to the tire factory where he worked. In parallel, we checked his biography and soon found out that Kevin had problems with the police 5 years before the murder of the young man. The man was accused of rape, and soon another case surfaced that had remained unsolved for more than a month. 4 weeks before the attack on Kaylee, another young woman, Christina, found herself in a similar situation. The incident was also under investigation, and in its essence, it resembled the fate that befell the heroine of this story. In the late hours, returning home from a bar, the victim became a victim of a stranger who grabbed her and dragged her into an alley, after which he began to beat her brutally. She received serious injuries, but was sure that she had been saved by a miracle, realizing that the criminal knew no mercy. Christina, in a desperate attempt to save herself, pretended to be dead, offering no resistance. As soon as her body stopped moving, he, seemingly satisfied, left, leaving behind only a shadow of horror. The attacker, apparently, experienced dark pleasure from violence, and this caused alarm. A potential serial killer could be hiding anywhere. Now no one felt safe. After the attack, forensic experts carefully examined the alley where the beating took place. A footprint was found in the snow, and detectives revisited this case, reviewing all evidence with new thoroughness. The evidence left at the crime scene was indisputable. The footprint found in the mud was carefully compared with the database. However, unfortunately, these were not Katie Pilar boots. But here's a pair of work shoes, identical in size, instilled anxiety. This large size indirectly confirmed the worst fears of investigators and gave grounds to connect the crime with the suspect. In attempts to understand at what point Kevin escaped, they realized that he disappeared from the radar immediately after the press conference, where the sizes and brand of shoes, as well as the pattern of the tread he wore, were announced. This could have scared the probable killer. Having obtained an arrest warrant, the police headed in his direction. The apartment where the tragedy occurred left no traces that could shed light on this case. No bloody shoes, no clothing that could point to the perpetrator. Even the drains and sinks in the bathroom were thoroughly checked, but here too, not a drop of blood was found. This put detectives at a dead end, and they began to fear that Kevin had managed to get rid of key evidence. At the same time, his friend named Mike came to the police station. He looked worried and stated that he might know where to look for Kaylee Bruce's killer. The day before, he had spent Friday evening at a club with his friend, who, as it turned out, was that very friend. On that ominous evening, when young people gathered to drink and chat, tension hung in the air. All this happened after the press conference, where detectives, like hunters, received a warrant for Kevin Halser's arrest. The main suspect, wanted, was at the very center of Michael's party. Suddenly, the phone rang, and Michael, picking up the receiver, heard the voice of a friend who insistently asked about Kevin's whereabouts. And there he was, the main suspect in the murder, sitting right across from him. Another voice on the line warned, "Stay away from him," because Kevin Halser was wanted on charges of a violent crime. On that ominous evening, when the shadow of murder hung over Mike, he showed remarkable prudence and self-control. The guy, overwhelmed with fear for his life, knew that Kaylee was in danger and noticeably became nervous. But his friend, quickly orienting himself, said that a girl had called him and was asking him to come home. The probable killer, suspecting nothing, also said it was time for him to leave. Mike accompanied him to the parking lot, and here they said goodbye, driving off in different directions. As soon as the suspect was out of sight, Mike instantly called the station, providing a description of the criminal's car and his clothing. Kevin had reported that he was heading south, but had no precise directions. The criminal, like a ghost, slipped away from justice, leaving behind only the golden trail of his car. Detectives, like predatory birds, swooped down on the parking lot, but there was neither Kevin nor his car. He had deceived them again, had slipped into the shadows again. The police interrogated the security guard, and he, as if under pressure, admitted that he had a long conversation with the suspect before he disappeared. Kevin headed to Indiana, intending to catch a train. Perhaps this was just a false trail, but the detectives had no other choice. They followed him like shadows, ready to catch the probable killer, who seemed to always be one step ahead. During the same period, testing of hair found on the metal part was completed. The blood taken from this small rod belonged to Kaylee Bruce, and the hair turned out to be male. Samples were taken from Kevin's apartment, which allowed comparing the DNA profile of the criminal. The match was complete, and fear seized everyone. He could, like a cornered beast, start killing. But Quinn Halser was intercepted and arrested. Earlier, during a transfer in Chicago, the guy refused to cooperate with the investigation and immediately demanded a lawyer. However, the evidence against him was irrefutable. The prosecution considered the trial a mere formality. Detectives found out that he had moved to this condominium just 6 months before the murder. They suspected that the criminal did not randomly choose his victim. She probably appealed to him, and he became obsessed with her. He began to follow Kaylee Bruce. He may have even stalked her. When the young man learned that she would be working here and studying in the city, he decided to be as close to the future victim as possible. Naturally, all this could not end well. On June 21st, in 1999, hearings began in the case of Kevin Halser, who was charged with the murder of Kaylee Bruce. Despite his father's wealth and an experienced defender, it seemed even he did not believe in his client's innocence. In October 1999, the jury returned a verdict. Kevin Halser was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Considering the possible connection with another similar attack on a girl in the city alley, the detectives' work was just beginning. Now they received full access to things related to the case. Quins, and checked the pair of shoes he wore. A small bloodstain was found on the seam. It belonged to Christina, the very girl who had been beaten half to death. In the 5 years that had passed since Kevin was convicted of rape, many more attacks could have occurred. Suspicions were checked, but these guesses could not be confirmed. Everyone in his environment was in danger. The witness who found her apartment open when she returned from work was shocked. By some lucky coincidence, having just missed Kevin Halser, the police began to suspect that this was not a coincidence. He stole the master key and used someone else's apartment, knowing that no one would be there long enough. After the massacre, he entered someone else's territory to take a shower and wash away traces of his attack. This clever move allowed him to avoid immediate pursuit. Polly, Kim, and Seuss realized what danger they all were in. Kevin actually didn't feel anything for Kaylee except cruelty. Anyone could have been in her place, as the guy deliberately looked for a reason to approach her. In the shadow of Traverse City, where life flowed steadily, a tragedy occurred that changed everything. The killer, like a chess player, carefully calculated every move, observing the young woman's routine. She first met Kevin Home Chun, and at that moment her fate was already predetermined. The murder of Kaylee Bruce was not just an act of violence, but a cruel reminder of how fragile life is. This massacre, devoid of meaning, forever remained in the memory of the townspeople, dividing their existence into before and after. People are divided into two types: those who Google details after the release, and those who just watch. Which are you? Write in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Detective Brooks' channel to not miss even more captivating stories that will give you goosebumps.